computer. Hello everybody and welcome to this March edition of BCSDA Exchange. My name is Andrew Petersen and I'm the CEO of BCSD Australia, and thank you for joining us today. In opening, as we always do, we acknowledge the First Nations people by expressing our grateful thanks for their custodianship of the land, the waterways, the air, and the culture that we in Australia benefit from, and in particular welcome any First Nations people who are joining us today. I'm coming to you from the land of the Cammeraygal people, and some have asked, where are the Cammeraygal people? I'm glad you asked. They are North Sydney. They are in fact a tribe, a clan, a group just slightly north of Crow's Nest, hence the name Cammeray, which is the suburb from whom we draw the name of the suburb that I'm in. I don't know where I went with that. Anyway, moving on. A big welcome to members and guests for this, the March edition. And in opening, we're going to give a new alert. Or a reminder, actually, going forward. And this is very interesting and instructive because our colleagues of the WBCSD, the World Business Council, have been doing this for some time. And because we are embracing appropriate protocols going forward, we're going to do the same thing. So because this is a business relevant, non-commercial event, we encourage you to avoid sharing any competitively sensitive information, including pricing, customers, future commercial strategy, or anything that could raise competition concerns. So let's kick off. February Exchange asked the question, what 2026 might look like? And since then, the context has moved quite quickly. 3 proof points from my perspective. Australia's first mandatory sustainability reporting cycle is now well and truly live, and we are seeing some of the fruits of corporate labour in relation to that. I mean labour as in effort as opposed to political party. The second, obviously, is the escalation of the Israeli-US-Iran conflict that has brought significant energy, logistics and market volatility straight back into the executive and board decision-making progress. And a very important decision that I don't think a lot of people have really caught up with yet, but that is the judgment handed down in Sydney, I think by the Federal Court, and I always get the name of it wrong, but it was ASIC versus Star Casinos. And why am I talking about that? Because it had a really important insight into the governance discussion, which as a result of that decision, I think has sharpened really what is the role of management versus boards. And we're grateful that we're going to have one of our speakers kind of give some thoughts and insights into that today. So today is very much a sequel to February, but I think in one sense a more practical one. So the session is about what leaders do now when talent, when governance, when AI, and when geopolitics are colliding, and colliding they most certainly are. Today we're going to hear 3 short perspectives. First, Richard Evans from Talent Nation on talent remuneration and delivery risk. Then we're going to hear from Trent Bartlett, who's a brand spanking new director of BCSD Australia. But more importantly, he is a professional non-executive director. And for his sins, he, with his company, is also a member of BCSD Australia. He's going to talk about governing in the age of AI and integrated board response. And then finally, we're going overseas, I think, to hear from Anthony Coles from Greengold Ventures on a really insightful piece that Anthony shared, I think, week before last in his frequent LinkedIn post on China's green economy narrative. And I wondered what it now matters in a period of all this geopolitical conflict. So we're grateful that he's able to join us today. But first, let's jump to Richard And in, I guess, creating the context for what Richard's going to talk about, um, it's really quite fascinating to me that the people dimension is very much now central to delivery for corporates, whether it's in capability, whether it's an incentives issue, whether it's a discussion about burnout. And I'm sure that's very true for a number of people on this call, and whether organizations are actually have the talent to meet the rising disclosure and transition expectations of investors, of regulators, of the general community. So, with that, I thought it was helpful to bring Richard back as he comes every year to join us to give us an insight into a report that he he publishes and puts out as Talent Nation, and it's always a must read. So, Richard, over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. It's great to be back again, and I'm joining you from the lands of the Bunurong people down here in Melbourne. So I guess what I thought is I'd just give you a brief snapshot, and often what I find with these elements is so each year we produce an annual sustainability report. Andrew, I think you've given me permission to share screen, so I will do this quickly. That should hopefully do that. Have you got that there? I can't see. Have you got the report there showing up? Okay, excellent. So each year we basically run a report on people
But
within
it's
ESG.
in not in presentation mode, it's in speaker mode.
Okay, I might just keep it as that.
Okay,
If
that's
I
fine.
moved
You
it.
might just need to expand the screen a tiny bit.
Okay, all right. How about that?
Yep, go
Is
for
that
it.
better? All right, perfect. So each year we survey circa 1,500 people in the space. Just the main thing is looking at remuneration. That's the thing that everyone cares about. You know, are they being paid fairly for the work that they're doing? But we also touch on a number of other areas, and it's expanded over time as we look at things like burnout. So I thought I'd just talk to some of the highlights of this. If anyone would like a copy of the report, I'll send it to Andrew and we can share that with everyone. It's about 80 pages all up, and I disappear into a hole for about 3 months each year as I try and pull together all the insights. So I guess if we look at it, it covers 16 role types, 12 industry sectors, looks at, you know, organizational structure and the remuneration frameworks. And so there's 5 roles within sustainability, 3 roles within ESG and sustainable finance, 4 within consulting and 4 within environment at different levels. And we look at whether organizations are listed, private, we look at consultancies, we look at government. So it's a fairly broad church that we go out to the market with, and then from that, I guess we've been doing it since 2019, so we're getting some pretty significant trends coming through in the data, and often with this, and I do say to anyone that reads this, you know, if you're given data, you can use it in whichever way you want, depending on your perspective. So this is a survey across the market. So people always read into it what they want to. It's funny how people will look at a role and go, well, that's what I do, even though they don't actually line up with the role. So a lot of our time is spent actually making sure that people are aligned to the correct roles. So I guess the biggest thing we've seen is there has been an increase in remuneration at that mid-career and senior sustainability roles. And the big thing around that is I guess that shift to compliance, as Andrew mentioned at the start. You know, we've had the first cabs off the rank in terms of mandatory disclosure reporting. And what we're seeing is that individuals at that kind of 3 to 7 year experience mark are being pulled out of consultancies and being put into organizations to manage reporting requirements. That's then leading on to another a bunch of issues around burnout and job stress. Again, I can touch on that shortly, because what we see is that technically they can do the job. Like, they understand what they're doing. They've been working in teams within the larger consultancies to actually pull together the information, but they're being thrust into an environment where they're the senior most sustainability person in an organization. They've never presented in front of a board before. They've probably never been in front of an executive without a partner or someone senior sitting there in front of them. And so they're just getting swamped. And then we're seeing that translate into that job stress and turnover. But they're getting significant uplifts in salary to move from a consultancy into an in-house role, because the expectation of the organization is that they can actually do the job, they can do the work, and they're not factoring in the pressure that comes with that. Last year was the first year that we looked at the Chief Sustainability Officer as a standalone role. And what we wanted to check was the number of CSOs that actually had broader roles. And that has actually lifted quite a bit this year. So we've seen integration of CSO roles into broader executive roles. And I guess that supports the narrative that we've seen, that a lot of the CSOs that we see in the market are not actually sustainability practitioners. They're executives. So they might be corporate affairs, risk, strategy, and sustainability is being brought into their remit. And then we see sectoral pay variation, but it's always the case in terms of risk and regulatory pressure. So the extractives are always pretty high. I'll keep moving quickly because I know that we don't have a lot of time here, but also it means that we can have some questions at the end. For a profession that focuses around sustainability, the top point is a pretty disappointing and damning one, that we are still seeing a significant gap in ESG professionals, and that's largely coming from a higher percentage of males in senior positions. So that's translating across the market. We're also seeing that when we dig into the data, that a lot of that comes down to the bonuses and incentive programs being paid. So there's a lot of work to do around that pathway to equity. Coming out of COVID, we actually saw that gap reduce, and then it's jumped again in the last 12 months. So whether there's another study that needs to be looked at in terms of the economy and economic factors, and whether that's playing into the conversation, I don't know, but that trend has reversed in the last 12 months, which is obviously something that we really don't want to see, and is not good for the organisations. KPI integration. So Andrew, I know you've touched on this in the past, but we have seen a slight reduction in executive KPIs linked to ESG and sustainability. It may be due to the fact that what we're seeing across the market is, with the increase in regulatory scrutiny, organisations are taking their foot off the pedal. And I guess we have seen this where we're not seeing the leadership that we've seen historically, particularly in the last 5 years. Organisations were looking to see how far they could progress things. The leaders have taken the foot off the pedal and are waiting for the laggards to catch up. So there's a comment by Paolo at Fraser's, Andrew, who I'm sure you know well, who he made a comment, it was a year ago, saying what he's seeing is that the leaders have stopped. So it's not a case of the ceiling being lifted, it's a case of the floor coming up. And that's certainly what we're seeing with a lot of the demand in the market, is organisations that aren't prepared for disclosures are hiring and trying to build their capability, whereas the leaders are definitely pulling back a bit. I'll keep pushing through this, and just in terms of, so turnover is always an interesting one. You know, we had 34% of teams increased in headcount. When we surveyed a year ago, it was around 60% thought they would be increasing their headcount. So we're seeing that there is that demand, but that's not translating into hires, and certainly hearing the narrative around organisations looking to rely on AI to increase the productivity of their teams. There was someone I was chatting to last week at Sustainability Leaders Summit, said that they, when they look at any reports, 80% is AI generated. So they will look for 80% to be done by Copilot, and then they will step in and do the last 20%. And one of them did a materiality assessment fully in Copilot, and then just tweaked the end of it, which is fine if you know what you're doing. You know, so if you know what you're doing, that's fine. But the issue is that when people come to rely on it, and again, high workforce mobility in the I guess the younger demographic, largely because of the stage in career, but also that ambition and they're being enabled in terms of stepping up into more senior roles pretty quickly. I guess the other thing that we're seeing as well is that the balance between working from home, like that hybrid model. So we're seeing that tension between organisations where some are going, okay, well, you need to come back to the organisation 4 days a week or 5 days a week in the office, and then others are doubling down on the flexibility. So there's a tension there between particularly the listed entities who are now saying, we want you back in the office full time. So that is leading to more turnover, but it's also creating challenges as well, because there's not the options for people if they are looking for that really strong flexibility. Data is the key for this year. It has been for the last 18 months. We're seeing, for, again, disclosures, it's dominating the narrative. Interestingly, I'm hearing some conversations around where organisations have implemented carbon platforms and they're actually reverting back to spreadsheets. And it's that balance of going, you know, the platform can solve all your problems, but you've got to make sure that the integrity of the data that's coming in is there. And I think that piece has been missed. So people are reverting to Excel to check the data and then actually inputting it back into the system. So there's a bit of double handling going on there. But as well, I think that's a maturing of the market. You know, there's organisations that haven't actually done this before, and I guess don't understand the level of complexity around actually getting hold of that information. And then again, this is the piece that we were talking about around the non-financial benefits, but that wellbeing, burnout. Over half of employees reported burnout risk, so they were burnt out, close to burning out, or you know, it was having an impact. But people still love their jobs. You know, saying 60% of people like or love their jobs. So there's still that connection to that sector, and people, they want to make a difference. They want to have an impact, but they're recognising that it's having a toll or taking its toll on them at the moment. So I think we are reaching a point at the moment where people are going to have to make some changes. And part of that is the sector as well, where people have been working really hard to try and get outcomes, and then coming out of COVID, there was strong demand and support for the work they were doing, and that's just continued to increase, and the volume of work just continues to lift without access to the resources. And I think that's pretty much it. You know, I think we are looking at the hybrid models is still being brought out. We're starting to see some differentiation currently with organisations that are offering more support around training and development, because that is something that has been lost over the last 5 years. It's dropped down in terms of priorities for organisations because they've been focused around the flexibility. So that is now starting to become a differentiator. We're seeing that there are gaps forming in the early career professionals because they don't have that one-to-one mentoring, the person sitting next to them in the office. And so we're starting to see some elements there where there's a need for that ongoing development and training, particularly in a space that's evolving so quickly. I think I'll probably leave it there for now, Andrew, in terms of, yeah, I'll send you the report. There's a lot more detail in there, including detailed breakdown around salaries and the like, but it means that people can review at their leisure, and the team here is always happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. We've actually put it into BCSD intelligence, but yeah, if you send it, I will then send it as part of the package for those who have attended and cannot attend today when I send that out. So that would be great. We'll leave Q&A until the end, and we might jump now to Trent. And if you think about it, if Richard's lens was about capability and investment incentives, and challenges of a particular cohort within organisations, I guess the next question that's troubling everybody's mind is, where's responsibility sitting in the broader narrative around governance and strategic oversight? And this is exactly where Trent comes into it. So, Trent, over to you. Very much interested in hearing your thoughts, particularly as you are a new board director, and I think you've also got a few slides to share as well. Now let's just check. We've had an internet problem. Can somebody just tell me if they can still hear me? We'll go to this.
Attended the AICD, Australian Industry Company Directors Governance Summit in Sydney last week, where a lot of material for today's quick presentation I think is relevant. And the ASIC chair, Joe Longo, was a speaker there, and he identified a two-speed dynamic as a specific concern. One was that individual directors are adopting AI tools personally, so concept of shadow AI in the boardroom. But boards as a collective body are not yet establishing policies or risk appetite reliance on AI in an area where human judgment is actually quite paramount. So directives are really encouraged to reflect on the decisions that are needing to be made now on how AI interfaces with the spectrum of risks and opportunities facing their organisations. Attendees on this briefing might be pleased to know that the sustainability governance agenda discussed at the summit last week has expanded well and truly beyond the focus that was primarily on climate at the 2025 summit. So Australian directors are now being asked to govern in a much more integrated way across a range of sustainability issues simultaneously, given the higher liabilities for directors and the greater expectations of stakeholder scrutiny than ever before. I've got a slide to try and bring some of this risks from the standard approach of likelihood and consequence, or probability and impact. Governing in the age of and what plausible scenarios might we actually need to plan for. So future thinking is what allows the board to stress test the strategy, identify those preconditions to watch, and make any no regrets decisions that are robust across multiple plausible futures rather than optimised just for one. So supply chain failure, climate disruption, AI vulnerability, and geopolitical and geoeconomic shocks don't arrive separately, they tend to cascade. And so the boards that are managing this well are the ones who see the system interacting with the global environment, not just the parts. And given world developments in the last 3 weeks, a self-check that the AICD Summit offered for directors was, have you seriously considered how your organisation would sustain core operations without telecommunications, fuel, water, or food security. If not, then this risk has not really been adequately elevated and framed. And so when we sort of think about how that might play out, then, oops, let's go back. Try that again. We all know that mandatory climate reporting under ASSB 2 is live for our larger entities. Again, ASIC Chair Joe Longo was quite explicit to directors at the Somerset this month. Sustainability reporting under Section 344 of the Corps Act is an affirmative director duty. He reminded directors that we're signing declarations that carry the same legal weight as financial accounts, and he reinforced that the accountability sits with the board, not the sustainability team. And so when you sort of look at that, there's a double-edged sword of AI in all of this, because AI is both a catalyst for climate innovation and a contributor to environmental and social stress. On one hand, it empowers breakthroughs, optimizing energy grids, decarbonising supply chains, predicting extreme weather and accelerating clean tech discovery. And insurers are now using AI to monitor and price climate risks, while financial institutions apply it to direct capital with sustainable portfolios. But on the other hand, AI is resource hungry. Demands for energy and water and critical minerals are growing and adding new pressures to already fragile ecosystems. And those pressures are already being further compounded by geopolitics and supply chain interdependencies. Hence this concept of velocity and interconnectedness of risks. So boards really are encouraged to approach AI as a double-edged opportunity, harnessing its transformation potential, but while governing its environmental footprint and social impact. We make note here about the human dimension problem too, the 72% problem, and building on Richard's points around talent. This is where the governance challenge is deepening. Research shows that approximately 72% of human work skills are inherently collaborative. So they depend on communication and judgment and relationship and contextual reasoning. And they're precisely the AI capabilities that are not able to be replicated, but they're rapidly reshaping them. So again, this is a tension that boards are being alerted to, that they can't ignore. The same technology being deployed to drive efficiency and sustainability outcomes is simultaneously disrupting the collaborative fabric of organisations. And so we do need to be mindful of what AI actually does to people. The future of work, therefore, directors are encouraged to think of this not as an HR question, it's a sustainability question, a risk question, and a strategy question, all at once. Andrew may note of the STAR judgment. I think this is an interesting point too when it comes to this particular topic. The STAR judgment that came out at last week's summit, just prior to last week's summit, draws a clear line. Non-executive directors are entitled to rely on management, but only if they have actively created conditions in which management is obliged to give them the full picture. So passive reliance by directors on reassuring summaries won't be enough. Applied to sustainability reporting under Section 344 of the Corps Act means boards really do need to establish clear board-level governance over sustainability reporting, not just delegate that to management. Ensure the Audit and Risk Committee charters specifically cover sustainability report overviews. Be clear about asking pointed questions on the methodology, materiality assessments, and the completeness of scenario analysis. And treat the period between now and 2028 as capability building window, rather than sort of a safe harbour, which is what directors are tending to think of them as now. The third point there is nature and circularity. So the second point is nature and circularity. Again, not separate from the AI governance conversation, they're part of it. The regulatory trajectory is quite clear. The same path that brought climate risk from voluntary disclosure to mandatory reporting is already in motion for nature. Directors are encouraged to think about a new concept of voluntary. Directors are being asked to initially establish voluntary targets, voluntary ambitions around these emerging areas of sustainability, only to find in due course they become mandatory, and then they get caught in this greenwashing, greenwishing, green hushing. And so this concept of voluntary, what might be sitting there as a voluntary standard, potentially becoming mandatory, is going to have to keep directors awake at night. And we see that with the TNFD framework. Clearly it's established, early adopters are reporting, regulatory attention is building. Boards that wait for that mandate before developing nature literacy are repeating the mistake they made with climate a decade ago. So on circularity, I think Australia's position is stark. We do need to be conscious of the $210 billion GDP opportunity that has been outlined by CSIRO from circular economy practices that are largely left untapped. Again, circularity also connects to governance priorities that boards are already trying to manage. Scope 3 emissions can't be credibly addressed without examining material flows. And indeed, AI's growing demand for energy, water, and critical minerals place it squarely in the dependency and material footprint challenge. So again, the question is whether those threads are being pulled together into a coherent picture for boards or managed as disconnected issues across governance frameworks. In terms of an AI governance perspective, AI really can't be treated as a technology matter. It's really a capability. And so how is AI shaping competitive advantage and business models? The board's role clearly is not to become technically proficient in AI, is to ensure that the 5 dimensions are governed together, not separately, and they are strategy, sustainability, the future of work, and legal liability and ethics. And so they need to make sure that the materiality assessments provide integrating discipline that connects all of those. So again, a great board question or provocation, I think, might be, is AI really transforming both our environmental footprint and our human capability simultaneously? And does our governance frameworks really treat them as connected, or are we still managing, again, as separate committees and separate reporting lines? And finally, the human capital, I just want to build again on Richard's point here. The ISSB's framework purely places human capital and human rights next on the agenda after biodiversity or nature. Again, you're not hearing a lot that organisations are building human capital data frameworks around workforce composition, skills transition, AI impact assessment, fair work practices. We're going to face the same scramble on human capital reporting that many are now experiencing on climate. And this has also got a financial dimension. Human capital is the largest cost line for most organisations. If AI is materially changing the productivity, composition, or the risk profile of that asset, it's arguably already a disclosure obligation under existing continuous disclosure and financial reporting frameworks, not a future sustainability reporting requirement. So what should boards asking now? We've sort of got this point here about we need to be having this sort of integrated response. And so my final slide really tries to sort of put down some practical actions that a director might want to think about from here. Maybe just pick one that might be most relevant to your organisation and where it is now, and perhaps starting to unpack that might be a good place to start. I think for boards, the message is clear. The fusion of AI and sustainability is not about ESG compliance or surfacing change, as it actually can offer a strategic moat. But we do need to think about proprietary data, trusted stakeholder relationships, the integration of our value chains and ecosystems can become advantages that competitors cannot easily replicate if we deploy AI effectively. And so I'd leave it there, Andrew, and I know you've pushed for time, so I'll hand back and happy to take questions later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Trent. And that's exactly why you're on our board. That was fantastic. Let's now jump to one more perspective, which is even broadening the aperture even further, and that is a recent LinkedIn piece that Anthony wrote on China's ecological value system and the green economy logic behind Made in China 2035. Sorry, I'm just reading in chat at the same time he's putting it there. I think it really felt especially timely, particularly how quickly geopolitical tensions have intensified. And so the question is, what is the future of this so-called green economy? Well, China has gone and put its map out there for all to see. In terms of how we're going to do this, though, rather than a formal presentation from Anthony, I've got 2 questions, and then we'll bring in both Richard and Trent as well. So, Anthony, for you, the first question: what did you want most business leaders here to understand from that post? What was it that you were trying to tell, I guess, an Australian audience in this particular case, about what was going on across Asia and in particular in China?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew, and thanks everyone for joining. It's great to be able to be a part of this good initiative. I guess the reason for the post came through the work that I've been doing over the last few years, trying to create more of a understanding of the opportunities for collaboration. And so what I've seen is really the decoupling of Australia's engagement with China from being a transactional trade relationship, stick it in a boat and they're just going to buy it and it helps our economy, to now fundamentally where what China is doing by creating, basically they've elevated the environment and ecological benefits into law and creating what I'm calling the green economy framework. So basically they are now putting the regulations there that combine what WBCSD is doing with the Task Force for Nature, but it's actually come about because government and industry are already doing it. So they don't introduce these things and say we'd like you to do this. They are saying this is what we are doing. And I used the framework from 2015 where China announced its Made in China 2025 goal, and I created a checklist in that post where it said, well, look at what they did in that period. And the next agenda or the horizon is 2035, where they have an ambition for this ecological civilization. And within that is basically really elevating industrial development linking to benefiting nature, within which the carbon markets as a financial tool have a key role. And so what I'm trying to do, I'm living and working in China at the moment in the batteries recycling sector, so circular economy, relevant to what Trent was just saying. And what I'm seeing is opportunities for Australia to shift its lens from just being transactional to being value add, and not bifurcating trade from defence and sovereign capabilities, but actually looking at ways that we can improve our economy by helping establish these global standards for traceability and circular economy.
Okay, so in practical terms, how should Australian leaders read Australia's role in Asia's green economy right now? Is it as a competitor? Is it a partner? Is it going to be a system shaper? Is it all three of that? Is it an investor? What does it look like to you?
Yeah, so I come from a marketing background. So my origins out of uni was, so I look at things from a marketing lens. So you've got what your customer want, what's your competitive environment, and what's your current capabilities. We're not a competitor, just from like the province I'm in is 66 million people in the GDP of Australia. And it's in the Yangtze River Delta region, which is the hub of the whole new energy ecosystem. So that's, 300 million people. So our issue is, I think, now moving to more risk management of how do we address our economic complexity and how do we manage our customer relationship so that we are embedded in what's happening as opposed to being at risk of being ignored. And so we're not a competitor. I think there's an absolute ambition and embrace for international collaboration. And so we actually do have some roles to play in that international governance and in those standards establishments. And one of the areas that I see that is, I guess, where we can get into the weeds with practical outcomes is things like this green steel opportunity. But the problem at the moment, there was a great piece of research done by the Heavy Industries Low Carbon Transition, something or other, CRC. And they highlighted 106 methodologies for carbon tracking across the steel industry, and one steel plant can have 40% change in its evaluation just from different methodologies. So And unfortunately, that research chatted with Korea, Japan, Europe, and didn't engage with China really. And so these are the things where this is our biggest customer, and we are dealing with them as in a transactionary manner, and we're not understanding what they want and what we need to do to help. And the modelling I've done on the economic opportunity is huge when you look at the decarbonisation of those supply chains, both the traditional hematite ore, but also excitingly the new magnetite ores that are being realised.
Okay, so bringing in Trent and Richard, the question that jumps out to me, particularly for Trent here, is: are Australian boards thinking this way, or are we more knee-jerk as Australian companies to the panic of cost escalation and therefore inflation as a result of what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz at the moment? And we don't think about the 5-year plan that China has just brought out and its potential for value creation in the Australian economy.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Anthony. I think there was a great coverage. I think the latter, Andrew. I sort of tend to think that the boards have been, as a general comment, quite focused and insular, and not as outward-looking as we might need to be, especially when it comes to the things that Anthony was talking about. I think we've been quite preoccupied with all manners of regulatory compliance. And not as being as strategic as we have needed to have been on a range of outward-looking matters. And I think the opportunities that Anthony's speaking about is a good example of just one of them. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm tempted to say we've known about the preparation for reporting for some time now, but moving on. Yeah, Richard. In your observation, particularly in the review of the year of the CSO, how do I put this question? Are CSOs actually asked to think about the strategic intent of things like China's green economy, or are we fairly de minimis in Australian corporate landscape by saying, well, sustainability means environment, it means climate change, it means reporting? I would have thought that looking at something like the recently released Green Economy was one of those big forward-thinking opportunities that every single business, primarily, I guess, extractives and minerals processing, but also financing, property, construction, infrastructure, the full panoply of our sectors. But Richard, are our CSOs actually being given the headwind to do that, or the tailwind rather to do that, or are they sort of being stick to your knitting, lads and lasses? That's what you're here to do.
I don't think it's just a CSO issue, Andrew. I think fundamentally that's one of the biggest issues that we face. And I always look at the superannuation sector and go, there's a huge opportunity to invest in things like the green economy, but because of your future, your super, there's hurdle rates, and so it's not just the CSO.
It's in the name, I would have thought. Yeah.
No, you're totally missing the point of it, Andrew. But it's like if a CEO makes an investment in something and there's a 5-year return and they make a loss in the first year, they're gone. So investors want their return now, and you have that with board, and so the focus is always short term. I look at the green skills, and we can see the demand that is going to be coming for green skills, but there's not that investment happening now because people are focusing, well, what does the next 3 months look like, or what does the next 6 months?
Yeah.
And part of that is that element of, well, we need to make sure that we're around in that period of time. So I think if you look at CSOs, they're tasked with what is keeping the board up at night, and it is disclosures. It's making sure that they're not being called out for greenwashing. It's they're not ending up on the front page of the papers. So it's risk mitigation first and foremost. So and there is also that challenge around sustainability in terms of the ability to look at value creation as well, because as a practitioner, you get things across the line because of the risk side of things, and actually translating it into something that generates genuine value for the organisation, they're not necessarily fully equipped for that. So short answer, no, they're not being equipped to look at these opportunities, but they're probably also not being thought of in terms of, are they equipped with the skills to actually address that? Is that something that should sit in strategy, or should it sit elsewhere? So how is it getting on the radar of organisations?
Yeah. All right, we might leave that hanging there. Conscious that we've just gone over time a little bit, but not too much. Thank you so much, Richard, Trent, and Anthony, for those insights. We will, of course, bring you back later in the year to test the assumption of the premise that we've been discussing today. And no doubt there will be more crises ahead of us in one form or another. For me, the big takeaway I think, though, is the challenge is no longer to interpret these isolated signals. It is very much to make integrated decisions on whether they're people, the issue of incentives, governance, disclosure readiness, strategic position in a much more fragmented world than even, let's say, a month ago. A reminder that BCSD Australia has always curated a growing body of ASRS-related insights through our Corporate Performance and Accountability Intelligence database, which you can access if you are a Learn and Above member through Insider. But the big news, as at this morning, is ESG Snapshot is back. Like a uni student, it had a great summer, but now it's back working hard for you. And if you haven't seen it, go back into spam and check that it's there, because it definitely went out this morning. And a final encouragement, please join us on the 25th of March for BCSDA Landscape, where we are going to feature David Kennedy, the head of SBTI, who's going to give us all things update and a few surprises. So I'll leave that hanging there deliberately as a teaser for you to come and join us. But thank you so much for joining us today. And as I always say, we very much look forward to seeing you somewhere in the future. Bye for now.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, everyone.